Good morning and good afternoon to all of you who joined us, and thank you for attending this Veeam webinar about importance of data backup for small businesses. My name is Maria Liuzzo. I am the Global Product Marketing Manager for Veeam, and I'm joined today by Sam Nichols, our Public Cloud Director, and David Hill, the global technologist specializing in everything for data protection, but specifically in cloud. The webinar will go through the agenda now and just high level describe what you can expect from through the content. We will share with you the reasons why we are organizing this event as a consequence of a survey that we ran early this year. Then Sam will share with us consideration that cloud consideration that an SMB should take when, of course, considering cloud data and data protection in general. Link that to your own data using 20 Cloud. Then we'll go through the Veeam Cloud capabilities high level, and David will demonstrate how Veeam backup and replication can back up cloud data. And finally, we conclude with the Veeam solutions that you have access to through the Veeam Universal License, and then a customs offer for yourself as a next steps. So Sam, if you move to the next slide, please. So about this webinar, you are muted on entry. However, if you have questions, please use the chat box and ask as many questions as you wish. And you will receive the recording and the content because we are recording this webinar. So you will get all the material at the end of this. So let's get into the bulk of the webinar. I anticipated that the reason why we thought it would be good to have a webinar with this subject is because in spring 2021, an independent research company surveyed around 400 small to medium size businesses in US and Europe. And this business had around between 50 and 250 employees. The objective of the survey was to understand what the overall data protection strategy and the sentiments of this business were in relation to some topics. Their overall IT spending and sentiments towards data protection, their present and future strategy for protecting servers, endpoints, and Microsoft Office 365, the role of the value-added reseller or the service provider in the small businesses data protection solution, and also the product usage by different data protection vendors and cloud. So the responding organizations were equally distributed, 50% from the US and 50% from Europe, specifically from UK, France, Germany, and Norway. And the results have been aggregated, and now we are going to share the results. There was a specific question, and this was more about sentiment and what the respondents felt were their IT challenges when presented with a list of high-level challenges. And of this, the respondent of this list of challenges, the respondents were also asked to specify which one was the most impactful. So the results were aggregated, as you can see. In light green is everyone is concerned, but then in lime green is where the most impactful. I think it's no surprise that the most impactful and the majority of people are concerned about cybersecurity events. So above all from the news that we read very often. But then if you go from top to bottom, excluding the economic uncertainty, you will also see that the main concerns that IT professionals like you have is about the capability to manage and have a control over all the data. So concerns about the outage of public cloud resources, or accidental deletion, outage of operating system and application software. So it's all about really, if we exclude the cybersecurity and economic uncertainty, it really is the bulk of data protection solution that should be able to help address those concerns. So today, and the reason why we created this webinar and we want to engage with you is to share that we are aware of the concerns, but we also have solutions that can address those concerns. And in fact, now Sam will take us through that journey, so we can share in details how cloud data protection can be your friend to address any concern that you have specific to data backup. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Maria. Just want to spend a couple of extra minutes on this slide because it's really interesting to see that, you know, out of these top, I think it's 9 concerns that folks have within the SMB when it comes to their, you know, IT challenges. Pretty much each and every one of these also apply to the public cloud as well. I think you could argue that, you know, outage of infrastructure and networking hardware is let's just say solved by going with a public cloud provider. They do offer very, very high degrees of resiliency. So if an outage were to occur, you know, you're going to get back up pretty fast, but they're going to assume the responsibility of that. But everything else on this list is ultimately still your responsibility. And for the duration of this this webinar, we're ultimately going to go and help you find out how to overcome all of these challenges right here. But before we do that, I do have a quick poll that I want to share with folks. And we do these polls to be interactive. It's nice for you to kind of voice what's going on in your environment, and then we can compare and contrast that with exactly what's happening in the market in broader research. So the first question is, who on the call today is running production in the public cloud? So I'm going to leave this open for, I guess, it was a good 30 seconds to give everyone an opportunity to vote. But really starting to see out of that SMB segment who's using the public cloud. So you've got 3 choices. First one is yes, next one is no, and the final one is no, but we're at least planning to. So give it a few more seconds as the final votes come in. All right, I'm going to close the poll and I'm just going to share the results with you now, and then we'll take a look at how that compares with industry standards. So the majority of you are running production in the public cloud today, 61%. Another 9% say not currently, but at least planning to. So I guess that gives us 70% of folks at least using or planning to use the cloud. And the remainder 30 have no intention right now, at least, to start using the public cloud. So hiding those, and let's compare and contrast that with some data from our Cloud Protection Trends report, which ultimately asked, how long have you guys been using public cloud in production? And an overwhelming 85% of folks have been using it for at least 1 year, with 41% for at least 24 months. So I think the key takeaway here is, you know, the cloud is still spoken about like it's something new, but we know that it's been around for a very, very long time. And especially in more recent years, it has become a very, very viable environment for you to run your production services from a cost-effective standpoint, from a performance, from a security standpoint. And that's really well compared and contrasted with our data protection trends report, which, you know, essentially takes a look at 2 years in the past and, you know, 2 years in the future. And no surprise, physical server utilization within data centers is on a decline. Virtual machines on hosts within data center, it looks like it is on a decline, but it's actually pretty stagnant, static. It's at a plateau, and it's simply just being diluted by the number of organizations that are opting to host their workloads in a public cloud, whether that's one of the key hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, GCP, or a regional service provider like one of our Veeam cloud and service providers. So, you know, hybrid cloud is very much here. It's very much now. Public cloud is great for production. And the next question is really looking at which public cloud platforms do you guys use today? And that's because we do have some demos lined up with David, and we want to make sure that those demos are tailored to what the majority of the audience want to see. So you've got the choice of AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. We've got our Veeam Cloud and service provider partners, which offer, of course, backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, but a number of them do offer infrastructure as a service as well. And then the others, which would be, other sovereign clouds. It might include things like Rackspaces, IBM Cloud, so on and so forth. So number of votes have come in, so I'm going to close the poll right now and share the results with you. This one's really interesting to see because the vast majority of the folks on the call today, 70% are using Azure, and that really goes against what is a trend in North America and globally, where AWS is the 800-pound gorilla, right? They own almost 50% of the market. The majority of organizations use AWS, but for those of you on the call today, it looks like Azure is the winner, so we'll be sure to focus some on Azure. So before we get into how Veeam can help you with these challenges, I do want to go over just some generic cloud considerations. It says for SMBs, it's really for any organization. And it's not explicit to those of you that are just considering the cloud. These considerations are equally important to those of you that are already there. So this is something that you should be doing on a very recurrent, frequent basis to make sure that you're getting the most out of the cloud. So these 5 concerns, again, aren't explicit to Veeam, just something that each and every one of you should be doing. So first up is understanding your responsibilities. Make sure that you understand what your responsibilities are in the cloud. It is a very common misconception that because you're using someone else's infrastructure, you're transitioning all the responsibility to that provider to manage, to maintain, to protect, to secure the entirety of that environment. And it is simply not true. Each and every cloud provider has very extensive available documentation for you to help you understand which responsibilities you are transitioning to them, but which ones you are retaining. And this is known as the shared responsibility model. There are a number of shared responsibility models out there from each and every single provider. They might be called models, they might be called matrices or matrices, but the long and short of it is it actually depends. And it depends on the varying as a service levels that you adopt, which dictate the varying degrees of responsibility that you are transitioning to that provider. But irrespective of whether that is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, that data that you are putting in the cloud is always yours and you are always wholly responsible for it. And that includes security and protection of that data. So point number 1 is just make sure that you understand that you own that data and it's your responsibility, and you're doing your due diligence to secure and protect the data in line with your service level objectives. Kind of leads into our next point, which is around architecting on best practices. Now, again, each and every provider is going to have their own set of best practices, and they might go by different terminologies and nomenclature, but again, they're all very, very similar in principle. So I'm actually going to use AWS, for example, because I know that one off pat, but theirs goes by the name of well-architected frameworks and the 5 pillars. And the goal of these frameworks and pillars is to help you understand key concepts, design principles, and architectural best practices to make sure that you are optimizing your cloud environment. And they even have tools available that help you review the state of your current environment, as well as centrally host and hold all of these best practices so they're easily accessible for you. But just kind of as a quick overview, it's not on the screen, but the 5 pillars are focused around operational excellence, which is around running, monitoring, optimizing, and improving your systems and your entire environment to make sure that you're extracting the most business value from a cloud provider. The next is around security, which, as we established earlier, is paramount on pretty much everyone's list. And we need to make sure that our environments are architected to ensure that our data is secure, that we have integrity of data, and that we're managing accesses and privileges and protecting systems. And there's this misconception that the cloud is less secure than on premises. It's simply not true. There's just a different set of best practices to leverage. So that includes things like knowing what are security boundaries in the cloud. In AWS, that's accounts. In Azure, it's subscriptions. In Google Cloud Platform, those are projects. So making sure you're doing things like cross-account subscription project backup to isolate your backup data. Leveraging things like IAM roles and Azure Active Directory to make sure that you are granting the right set of permissions to tools within your environment and people within your environment. Leveraging things like immutability to make sure that the data is written once and can never be changed or deleted. Again, just to ensure that your environment is secure as possible. We've obviously got the other things like multi-factor authentication, encryption, that kind of thing, but security, of course, is again paramount, and we need to make sure that our environment is architected based on that. The third pillar is around reliability, so ensuring that all of our workloads in the cloud are functioning as expected and correctly. That includes things like resilience to recover from failures, especially for mission critical applications. In places like Azure, you want to use things like paired regions. So if one region were to go down, another region is going to take over. But that involves replication, and hopefully all of us on the call know the difference between backup and replication. One is not a replacement for the other. They go hand in hand, because backup is going to help you recover from any and all data loss events, right? Whether that is accidental deletion, intentional deletion, cybersecurity threats, all of that would ultimately just be replicated over. If you have a backup stored independently, you're going to have something to recover from. Pillar number 4 is around performance. So making sure that you're utilizing the right computing and storage resources for the workloads that you have and their desired performance, right? You don't want to be using and ultimately paying for machines with big CPU, RAM, and storage metrics if a workload is never going to come close to using that, and vice versa, right? You don't want to undersize a machine and impact its performance. So make sure that you dynamically address that as that workload scales or shrinks. And then last but not least is around cost optimization, right? Making sure that you understand and control how and where your organization's money is spent and that you don't incur any unnecessary costs, right? Because this is very, very critical in backup, because we're dealing with ultimately copies of our data, which are consuming, again, CPU, RAM, storage, networking. And it also leads nicely into the third bullet, which is on the screen, which is around modeling your costs, right? So there's a myriad of tools available that have many parameters that you can go in and play with to help forecast and understand how much running a production workload in the cloud is going to cost you. We also have tools within Veeam solutions to help you understand how much backup is going to cost you in the cloud, but ultimately make sure that you're consistently modeling your costs so you don't get any surprises on your monthly bill. Of course, there is always as well the promise that the cloud is more cost effective on premises. It's not necessarily true for everything, and we'll get into that in a little bit in this next point, which is around retaining control of your data and making sure that it's not locked into any one platform. The next slide is going to go into what this actually looks like in the real world, but I just want to make it clear, not every workload is suited for the cloud. It might be for cost reasons, it might be security, performance, compliance, data sovereignty, that kind of thing, but ultimately make sure that you can do what you want with your data when you want to. And this is becoming more and more apparent in the industry. Gartner has actually recently released a very good document about building a SaaS exit strategy that I would recommend everyone on the call read. The same certainly goes for IaaS and PaaS as well. But again, ultimately, workloads that are developed in the cloud might be best suited for being developed in the cloud, but might be best suited to be run in production on premises. As something grows, it might be better to bring it back on premises. So retaining that control and making sure it's not locked into that platform is going to be critical to your organization, again, from a performance, scalability, security standpoint as well. And the final one is around considering the entirety of your environment, right? You are likely going to be like 94% of other organizations, hybrid. You're leveraging, on-premises locations, remote locations, and one or maybe even more clouds. Now, not all backup is created equal, and the way that you optimally protect a virtual machine, a physical machine, a cloud machine, a containerized application, a SaaS application. They're all very different. So you don't want to be landed using a tool that's not optimized for each of your environments, but you also don't want to be landed with multiple tools from multiple vendors that ultimately just is going to give you a costly, complex nightmare to manage. So again, consider the entirety of your environment. So I did mention that on this slide, we were going to show something that seems a little bit antithetical to the trends in the industry, which is this massive cloud acceleration. I mean, I just spoke about it 5 minutes ago, but we also ask customers and prospects and non-Veeam users, have you ever brought workloads back from a public cloud host to on-premises? And more than 50% of folks said yes, right? So on the very left-hand side, 23% say that they developed the workload in a cloud, but they already planned to run it in production within their data center. So they needed that control, that ownership of their data to extract it from the cloud, migrate it to on-premises and put it into production. An equal number of folks did say that they migrated workloads from on-premises to a cloud, but once it had been running there for a while, they decided to bring it back on premises. Again, that could be for a number of reasons: sovereignty, compliance, performance, cost. But ultimately, these people valued the ability to move workloads from the cloud back on premises. And then the smaller percentage, the 7%, is in a disaster recovery scenario, right? So we're leveraging the cloud as a DR target. The fires have been put out back on premises. The data was always intended to be brought back. So just an interesting insight there. So now we start to get into how Veeam can help you in the cloud. And we really break this down into three major buckets. And I'm going to double click into each one of these over the next couple of slides. And then David's going to got a very comprehensive demo to show you so you can see all of this in action. But the first one is around protecting, managing, and securing data in the cloud. The second bullet is around leveraging the cloud for data protection and security. And the final is BAS and DRAS, right? We know the desire for this is going up. Veeam takes a very non-prescriptive approach across all of our technologies and our consumption models. So from a BAS and DRAS perspective, you can leverage one of thousands of Veeam Cloud and service provider partners to deliver that, to do managed services, or you can go the more traditional route with a self-managed solution that you pay for directly with Veeam, implement, manage, so on and so forth. So flexibility is key here. So double clicking into that first bullet, right? Protecting, managing, and securing data that lives in the cloud already. We have a number of capabilities here. So first up is our cloud native backup, right? This is our ability to natively protect machines within AWS, Azure, and GCP. So we've been doing this for a number of years now. We do leverage native technologies within those clouds to deliver that best in breed backup. We utilize automated snapshots to help deliver very low RTOs and RPOs. And we also help you tier that across varying object storage tiers to retain data in line with your SLOs while controlling costs. It's very flexible recovery options as well, full machines, granular recoveries, the list goes on. We've also got Microsoft 365 backup, which we've had for probably 5 or 6 years now, quite a while. But any data that you have in Microsoft 365 or Office 365, as I guess is its legacy name, so Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Teams data, we have the ability to back that up for you as well, because again, Microsoft 365 is software as a service, and it adheres to that shared responsibility model. And that data, if you ever want to, recover an email, if you want to recover a Teams chat, a OneDrive file, a SharePoint site, whatever it might be, you can do that with Veeam. Salesforce backup is one of the new ones. It's actually not GA yet, but it will be going GA early next year. But we will be introducing the ability to protect Salesforce, which is again software as a service. So your data and metadata that you have in Salesforce can be protected. You'll be able to write that to an on-premises repository or a object storage repository in AWS or Azure. For just over a year now, we've been able to protect containerized workloads managed by Kubernetes. So we have backup, restore, disaster recovery, and application mobility for those Kubernetes flavors, whether you choose to host that on premises or whether you choose to host it in a public cloud platform. So that includes Amazon EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. And if you were paying attention at reInvent this year, we are a launch cloud partner for EKS Anywhere. So you can now deploy EKS on premises, and Veeam can protect that as well. We also provide protection for AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, and also GKE, the Google Kubernetes engine. And then the final one is cloud mobility. It's not necessarily a product, but more so a capability that spans our platform. And this is that non-prescriptive approach I was talking about. Veeam ultimately does not care where you place your data. We just want to help you protect your data at its source with a purpose-built tool for that environment. If you ever want to move your data to a different environment, that might be from on-premises to the cloud, from the one cloud to another cloud, from the cloud back on premises, we're going to deliver you the capabilities to move that data. And then when it lands at its new destination, protect it with that purpose-built, a new purpose-built tool for that environment. It can all be centrally managed using Veeam backup and replication. It is all centrally licensed using our Veeam Universal license, so you don't have to go out and procure new licenses for new software or anything like that. The license will just automatically follow with it. And I believe Maria has some slides on that later. Next up is around leveraging the cloud for data protection and security. So this is our on-premises workloads that instead of backing or targeting backup infrastructure on premises, we're going to target cloud infrastructure for our backups. So we have the ability to do that for backups and for archive. That's with our scale out backup repository. So these are object storage extents that you add to your scale out backup repository that complement an on-premises performance extent. So you ultimately, as data ages, automatically transition it to colder and colder storage options because the likelihood of needing a quick recovery is reduced. And again, that's fully automatically managed. So we support a number of options for on-premises storage for that performance tier, where you can have those very quick RTOs. We support the flavors of object storage in AWS, Azure, GCP, and IBM for the capacity tier, which is for backups. And as you archive that, we can do that into S3, S3 Glacier, S3 Glacier Deep Archive, Azure Archive Storage, Google Cloud Archive Storage, which have fractions of a cent per gigabyte per month costs. So you can retain data in line with your retention or compliance requirements without blowing up your budgets. Another interesting piece about the cloud is the ransomware protection piece. Right, Veeam is a big advocate of the 3-2-1 rule, with one of those copies ideally being offsite and air-gapped, so we can leverage the cloud for that. But also with AWS, we can leverage the S3 object lock integration to deliver immutability. So once those backups are written, per the policy that you create, and again, David will show you this, that data cannot be changed or augmented or deleted or any other synonym of those words that you can think of. That data is there to stay. And because it cannot be changed, if a ransomware event were to happen, the backups cannot be changed. So you're not going to be recovering from a backup that might be dirty and you just reinfect your environment with ransomware. You're going to have that assured clean recovery. And then the final piece is around disaster recovery and lift and shift, which are very, very similar scenarios that use the same technology, right? So being able to leverage the cloud for a disaster recovery target, whether that's using like VMware Cloud on AWS and the different flavors on Azure and GCP, whether that is direct restore to AWS, Azure, or GCP. So being able to take any Veeam backup and recover it into AWS, Azure, or GCP in just a few clicks. And that might be whether it's for a disaster recovery scenario, but also other scenarios, right? So like lift and shift, migrations, those are after all just a planned disaster recovery where the initial intention isn't to bring it back on premises. So you can use that same technology for migrations. We can also do that for dev test because we can leverage that production fresh data in the backup, instantiate that for dev tests, troubleshooting, so on and so forth. So we've got a very simple architecture on the cloud, which sums up everything that I've just spoken about and our mantra, which is own your data on any cloud. So whatever your environment looks like, whether it's you leverage all 4 environments that you see on the screen here, or a combination of some of them and not the others, we will ultimately help you protect your data wherever it lives, move your data to wherever you want it to go. There is no additional charges from Veeam to move that data, so no Veeam tax. We again just giving you those tools to do what is best for your organization at that point in time. And as those needs change in the future, again, it's just those purpose-built tools to help you move that data, no licensing headaches, nothing. So it's much easier to see it than say it. So I'm going to transition you over to Mr. David Hill, my compatriot. David, you should have control of the screen, and David's going to give us a demo. Take it away, man.
And while David sets it up, there is a question previous from that just you said, Sam. What AWS services can I protect with Veeam?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you can protect a number of AWS services using Veeam or cast them by Veeam. So you can protect VMware Cloud on AWS. You can protect VMs in the form of Amazon EC2. You can protect relational databases with Amazon RDS. So those are your MariaDBs, PostgreSQL, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, and Oracle. You can protect your file shares, Amazon EFS. Your virtual private cloud settings, VPCs. I think David might show that later in the demo, not 100% sure. And then also things like Amazon EKS, so that's the Elastic Kubernetes service, again, whether that is in AWS or on premises.
There is a further on a question about the Amazon EKS Anywhere Validation integration. Do you have any more information about the integration?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jason, we did make that announcement this week at reInvent. I believe the announcement went live on Tuesday, so there is a press release about it. And then I believe it's the CTO of Kasten did also do a pretty extensive blog on how that works. So while David does his presentation, I will look for that link and shoot it to you in the chat. I'll just share it to everyone in the chat in case anyone else is interested.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, over to David.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, as everyone said, they wanted to see a bit of Microsoft Azure, so we'll start with Microsoft Azure. What I'm first going to show you is just the standalone cloud products that enable us to back up the workloads in individual cloud platforms. So for example, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure, kind of fairly obvious what it does. It protects workloads running in Microsoft Azure. And we also have Veeam Backup for AWS, same interface, same dashboard, everything. Now, Veeam takes a modular approach to how to protect workloads. So whether you want to protect some instances running in AWS, some VMs running in Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or whether you're protecting vSphere, or you're protecting Office 365, or even just some Windows physical VMs or laptops or MacBooks or whatever you want. Everything that Veeam has is modular, so you can deploy the products individually, or you can deploy them and have them centrally managed. So I'm going to showcase 2 kind of use cases we have for that. So first off, I'm just going to show you the Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure platform product, sorry, and it's very simple to deploy. You go to the Azure Marketplace and just search for Veeam, and then you're able to deploy Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. Same in AWS, same in GCP, and so on. Once it's deployed, you're presented with this dashboard, and it gives us a number of key pieces of information around instances, protected VMs, policies that we have defined, and then how many backup repositories we have. Now, from this perspective, it's really easy to get started. Once we have it deployed, we simply go to policies, and we can configure what we want to protect. So I'm going to edit this existing policy here, but what you'll notice here is we have a number of different types of resources. So we have virtual machines, and we also have Azure SQL. So we're able to protect not only Azure virtual machines, but also managed SQL databases through Azure SQL. You'll see in AWS as well, over here, the resource tabs that we're able to protect EC2, RDS, VPC, and EFS volumes. So you can see kind of the direction that this goes in as we scale and expand the supported product set. So if we edit this policy, we simply give the policy a name, and we can see here that I've called this one Essential US Backup Resource Group, and that is specific to what I'm actually protecting. Next, we pick our sources, so we can pick multiple Azure Active Directory accounts if we want. We can pick multiple regions, so we can pick one region, many regions, or all regions, and then we can pick what we want to protect. Now, again, we can say we just want to protect all resources in those regions. So if we picked all those regions and then said all resources, every single Azure VM I have in my Azure account would allow me to protect all of those automatically. Or we can pick individuals. So we can do it via subscription. So if we have multiple subscriptions, we see here, we can protect resources just in every subscription we want. We can do individual virtual machines. We can do tags if we want to build out any automation, or we can do it via resource groups. Now, resource groups is quite good. So I actually have a resource group just called backup, and we're able to protect that. And what that allows us to do is any virtual machine that we create in that resource group is then protected through this backup policy. So anytime we create one, it's automatically protected and added to this. Next, we're able to do application aware backup. So we can do like snapshots using VSS. So anyone who's using the volume shadow service in Windows, we can turn that on. We can do pre and post script backups as well. So we can say, I want to run this script on this particular Windows instance before we actually go and run and protect that. Next, we specify our target. So do we want to do backups? So do we want to just leverage snapshots, or do we want to actually turn on backups so that we can actually push those backups out to the backup repositories as well? Next, we pick our schedule, so we can do like daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. We specify when we want to do it, so we can do a snapshot at say 2 a.m. We can do a backup at 8 a.m. We can do another one at 7 p.m. and so on. We specify our retention period, so how many snapshots do we want to keep? How many backups do we want to keep? Remember, we use snapshots in Microsoft Azure and AWS and GCP to help speed up the RTOs, but we can also offload those out to object storage for longer term data retention. And then we can pick which backup repository we want here, whether we want to pick a hot or cool or however we want to do it. Once we have that configured, we go over to our cost estimation wizard. I've configured something wrong. There we are. Live demos. Now we go to our cost estimation wizard, where we have just a breakdown of what this is going to cost. So we can see, based on the Microsoft Azure list prices, that our snapshots for each individual machine that we have in that resource group are showing what it's going to cost. So basically, this is going to cost us $9.93 a month to actually protect these actual instances in Microsoft Azure. So again, it's very powerful, very simple to use, and it gives us a lot of granular information around what we're protecting. Once we have our data protected, we can actually go in and just do restores. So we can pick off our restore point. So we can see here, I've got some in Azure backup repositories, I've got some snapshots, and I've even got archive data as well. So we've archived that off out to Azure Archive to help lower the storage costs. So with that, I'd have to go and retrieve the backup, because obviously it's stored and you have to actually pull that data back. Or I can just go pick this snapshot and say, right, I want to go do a restore. How do I want to restore it? Do I want to restore the whole VM, just do a disk restore, or go even further down in a granular level and do a file level recovery as well. So very simple, very easy to set up. From a configuration perspective, we have the ability to protect multiple Azure accounts. So we can just go in and just pick different ones. We can add in multiple Azure accounts. We can create service accounts automatically. We can specify existing service accounts and so on. From a repositories perspective, we can add in hot and cool and also archives as well. So if we look at what we're able to actually configure from a repository perspective using object storage, we can actually go in, pick all our different storage accounts, and then we can go in and we can pick our different storage classes down the bottom here. It's the same in AWS. If we look at our configuration over here, we can pick multiple AWS accounts and add those in using IAM roles. We can go in and create multiple repositories. We can see that we're using Deep Archive as well as S3 Glacier and S3. So the products are identical. They just add different capabilities for each cloud platform. Now, what happens if you live in this multi-cloud world that we find ourselves in? Well, with Veeam Backup and Replication, we're actually able to centrally manage all our backups, regardless of what platform we're trying to protect. So what you see here is Veeam Backup and Replication, the main console window, and we have a number of different types of backups. So we can see I've got my Azure SQL, my Azure VM, that's that backup policy we were just looking at there. And I've also got like EC2, EFS, some RDS, got some more Azure VMs, I've got some GCP backups, but I've also got Linux and Windows agents backups. I've got VMware backups, so I'm protecting my vSphere backups. So I'm able to protect all my and manage all my backups centrally through Veeam Backup and Replication. And that's very powerful. And from that perspective, we're able to do restores directly from snapshots. So if I take a look at this one, for example, an AWS snapshot, I can just right click and say I want to do a restore. If I go to my external repositories and again look at AWS, for example, I've got a Windows VM here. I can right click on that. I can restore that back into EC2, or I can even go and migrate that over to Microsoft Azure or the Google Cloud platform. I can even go and do instant VM recovery to vSphere, so I can actually live stream and restore that backup onto a vSphere or a Hyper-V host directly from the backups in the object storage. So it's very, very powerful. Sam talked about how we manage our scale-out backup repositories and how you can use object storage to extend your capacity for your on-premises backups. And what we see here is I have 3 different types of backup media. So we have Windows, it's just local storage. I have object storage, and I've got Amazon Glacier. Now, what this allows us to do is for any backups that we're running on premises, I can store all these locally, so on a performance tier. So if I need to do any restores, they're very local to my infrastructure, very easy to go and set up and deploy and configure. But then I can use the object storage for that longer term data retention, which really helps us drive down the cost of storage and implement that more compliance and long-term data retention. And then again with Amazon Glacier, I have the ability to use archive tier that really helps us lower the costs of all our infrastructure and everything else. So if I just right click on this scale out backup repository, we'll see how easy it is to configure. It's all based. So what we do is we add in our performance tier, and I mentioned that we have the ability to just use that for our local performance for restores. But then I also have a placement policy. So what do I want to do with this? Do I want it locally, or do I want to base it on performance? And then I have the capacity tier. So when Sam was talking about that 3-2-1 rule, where you have 3 copies of your data with at least 2 different media types with at least 1 off-site, this is where we can implement those backup policies around how we want to actually meet our objectives for that 3-2-1 rule. So we see here, based on these policy definitions here, from our capacity tier, we have the ability to copy backups as soon as they're created. So what that means is, as soon as we take a backup and we put it on our local performance tier, we can then copy that backup directly off to object storage. And we also have the ability to specify that we need to move backups to object storage as they move out of the operational window. So from that perspective, we can say that after 7 days, then we want to move those out to object storage. So we actually take them off the performance tier and move them to object storage. So that helps us reduce our storage costs because we're not using expensive on-premises storage to actually protect our backups. And we're also implementing lower storage costs because we're moving them to object storage. We have is the archive tier. So again, this uses Glacier Archive, and we specify that any backups that are older than 90 days that are on our capacity tier, we're going to archive those off to our Glacier Archive object storage bucket. So again, it's all policy based, very simple, very easy to set up and implement. What we can do is just simply add in multiple object storage platforms. So we can protect, like we can implement Azure Blob, Google Object Storage, Amazon S3, and so on. Now we also have the ability to configure immutability that Sam was talking about. So that allows us to use the object lock feature in AWS S3. So we see here that we have a particular AWS account. We have our bucket already created, and we have the ability to turn on here the make recent backups immutable. So we can specify that we want these to be locked for 90 days. And essentially what that says is that any backup that we offload to our object storage bucket here, which happens to be this object 01, then we are able to make our backups immutable. And essentially by saying that for 90 days, nothing can be deleted, the only way that you could delete that data is to go in and actually delete your AWS account. And again, Amazon have a lot of kind of capabilities that stop essentially safety gates and safety checks, that even if you go and delete your AWS account, you're going to be able to recover from that. So it's a very powerful way to protect your data and implement that capabilities to help protect you from ransomware and also from like rogue admins. You know, we've all heard about the admin who gets a bit annoyed when he happens to get fired and he still knows the account details, and before you can do anything about it, he's gone in and deleted all the data. This protects that from that as well from a backup perspective. So it makes the backups very simple and very secure to use. And then finally, what we have is the ability to implement backup copy jobs as well. So from a kind of, again, meeting that 3-2-1 rule, we have the ability to say, okay, I'm taking some backups of my AWS EC2 instances here. I want to do a backup copy job and I want to actually bring them locally. Now, what this does is we can see here that every 30 days, I go and take the latest restore point of this particular backup. Here's my object. It's my Unify controller in EC2. And then I specify my target. So I pick up my scale out backup repository. And then I want to keep 3 of these retention policies. And then I can define a scheduler when I want to do this. Well, what this actually does is when we think about that backup, scale out backup repository, this is an AWS EC2 instance that's running in my production AWS account. This is not where my backup data is stored. So from that 3-2-1 rule, I'm actually saying, okay, I want to take a backup of this EC2 instance and I want to offload it to object storage. Then what I'm saying is I want to do a backup copy job and bring that back down to my scale out backup repository. So when we think back to what I was saying, I'm actually putting a copy of this onto my local performance tier on premises. This allows me to very quickly do a restore of this workload to, say, like my vSphere platform. But based on the policies that I defined, I'm also taking copies of this. As soon as it goes on here, it's then getting copied to another S3 object storage bucket. So from that perspective, it gives us a lot of control around how we can meet our compliance and regulation policies to implement, not only making sure that we're protected against ransomware and data deletion and data corruption, but also that we have multiple copies of our data and also stored in longer term, like Amazon Glacier, for example, for our long-term data retention and that kind of perspective.
This is actually
so very
nice
powerful, very simple.
Oh,
and,
sorry, David.
Yeah, it's just back to you, Sam.
Oh, I was just going to say it's a nice segue to one of the questions that we've had from Mark come in that could he take a production in Azure and store that in a repository in AWS? And I think you kind of touched on that very last point, which is you write it to that. It would be an Azure blob bucket, which is then copied on premises, and then that would then be tweeted out.
So if we look at this Azure demo copy job, I'm actually taking a Azure virtual machine here and I'm doing a copy job. So it goes onto my scale out backup repository here. And then once that's copied down to that backup repository, it then goes and gets offloaded out to S3 object storage. So yes, that's exactly what you can do. And it's very easy to do just with the backup copy jobs.
Yep, a couple of other questions from Michael. Do you have access to full backup logs for Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure for troubleshooting?
Yeah, so what we have is the ability to do logging in Microsoft Azure. So we can see here, I was in the wrong interface, that we have our sessions logs and we can see what's going on. So we can go in, we can make sure that everything's protected, it's all ran, we can see the status of it all here, so we get successes. Because our products are so good, I doubt I've got any failures. Oh, there we are. So we can get information around what's happening, what's going on. So from that perspective, yes, we have full logging of what's happening and what's going on.
Yep, any secondary questions around monitoring, so that you kind of just covered that right here as well, so that's awesome. Yep. All right, great. Well, I'm going to take back control. 1 second and just present my screen.
And I think we entered in.
Yeah, here's that blog that someone had asked about as well. I did share it in the chat as well. So if anyone's interested in reading about Amazon EKS anywhere and Veeam being a launch partner, that is right there.
Another question came in, Sam, if we can replicate from an on-prem VM to Azure directly without using a third party. That's by Ted.
That is a really good question. I think David, being the more technical of us, is going to provide the best.
Sorry, what was the question?
Can we replicate? Sorry, Sam, you go.
Oh, I was just going to, can we replicate from an on-prem VM to Azure directly without using a third party?
Yes and no at the moment. We can't replicate, but what we can do is we can do the restores. So we can put our, say it's like an on-premises VM, vSphere VM, whatever we want to do. We take the backups and we upload that to S3 as an example of an object storage perspective. Those backups are then stored, and then we can do a restore of that VM into, say, AWS. So we can take a vSphere VM and we can restore that into AWS on the backups that we're storing in object storage. So it's not replicating in the sense that you can just hit a button and fail over, but we have the ability to actually store to the different platforms with the data that's being backed up and kept in those object storage repositories.
Yep. And then another question from Michael, do we support SAP HANA database backup?
Yes, we do, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Why don't you bring us home, Maria?
Yes, thank you. So we're finishing off with how can you access all these capabilities. Depending on your environment, whether you are running a mixed hybrid model with virtual, physical, or cloud backup, SAS apps, we have the Veeam Universal License, which is in fact a unified universal license, which is applicable to any workload type. In fact, with one license, a flexible per workload annual subscription, you can utilize it to protect any workload type. It is not just for one workload type, but you can transfer it anytime you wish. And for this reason, we consider this future-proof because it gives us the flexibility to continue innovate in the data protection field. You can move easily from physical to virtual to multi-cloud, Windows, Linux, NAS, anything. And also, it hasn't got lock-ins because it doesn't require any specialized hardware. So we have the unified Veeam Universal License. And then if you want to acquire a product, being a small, medium business size, our entry point is Veeam Backup Essential, which is a bundle of Veeam Backup and Replication that David shared with us earlier, and Veeam One. Altogether, give you the opportunity to back up the data and monitor your environment. And that's the bundle, and it's decisively unique for managing a mixed environment. If you instead are running cloud standalone, you can actually purchase the license for the standalone cloud option for AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. For Office 365, we have another license that offers protection for Office 365, the same for the Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator and CAST and K10. So it very much is a flexible offering opportunities that matches your environmental needs. And if you need further details on this, you can contact the Veeam sales representatives. And specifically for you, exclusively for you today attending, we have on offer a free AWS Azure backup, where it gives you unlimited coverage for 30 days, plus additional credits for the use of cloud repository that you can get back from either Azure or AWS. And additionally to that, if you buy then for 12 months, you get 25% off. The details, you can find them on the website. If you scan the QR code now, you will be redirected to a landing page with more information. So that's how much we wanted to share with you, the why it is important to back up the cloud, the reasons that Sam explained to us, and the fundamental consideration that any business should have, and then how Veeam backup solutions address those challenges that we highlighted at the beginning. So thank you very much for your attention. I see that there is an additional question. I have a small environment without an on-prem server. We use all the M365 services without any VMs in Azure. How can I get an idea of what my monthly Azure cost would be for backing up M365?
That's a really good question. We absolutely have a calculator out there that will help you understand the cost of Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. I'm not 100% sure if it also helps you forecast the object storage consumption if you do place it in Azure Blob. I would say play around with that tool and see if it works, and if not, reach out to one of your Veeam representatives or systems engineers, and they'll be able to help you out with forecasting that.
Thank you for the last question. So that was this is the end of it. Is there an additional consideration from you, Sam?
No, I don't think so. Just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I do hope that you enjoyed the webinar. Please take advantage of that awesome offer that we have available, so you can get your hands on some of our latest technologies for free. Even the infrastructure costs are going to be covered with that 250 cloud credit. So again, just thank you to everyone for joining. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you on a webinar soon.
The webinar will be sent via email, and you can also get it offline. For Roberto, that was the question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.